I have represented more 14, 15, and 16-year-old kids that have either been shot, have shot somebody, or been shot at. First thought in my head was, why would this detective name him in the email? Because it said based on my previous conversation. So I was like, they fucking have a phone call where she was like, I need you to identify this person who's on your probation in a video, because that's the only way you can read that email. That's a confirmation of a tainted ID. I figured, you know what? It's better if that comes in, because then they get a flavor for how bad this investigation was and how absolutely rife with bullshit it was. And they get a real feel for it.
Because I know the prosecution doesn't typically give us all the evidence. We kind of have to keep going back and forth to get what's omitted.
I kid you not, Chris. This was like the craziest things I've ever seen happen in my career. He gets up, this like middle-aged white dude just stands up in the pool and just goes, wow, another black kid with tattoos. He must be guilty. Totally tainted the whole jury.
Oh,
totally,
wow.
And I remember turning around. I think I audibly said, are you fucking kidding me? Like out loud to like this guy and to the panel. You're gonna have to go into your imagination to come up with an explanation as to why this detective was reassigned and no further action was taken on this file.
That's beautiful. What was the reason why she was no longer alive?
While we always expect our law enforcement to do things correctly, to be diligent, and to be fair, it doesn't always happen. A healthy skepticism never hurt anybody. And there's a Russian proverb that says, trust but verify.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Iron Gavel. I'm Chris Washington, a personal injury and criminal defense attorney with over 17 years of courtroom experience. Bi-weekly, we bring you gripping true stories of justice, strategy, and humanity from inside the courtroom. Today's story is one of high stakes, sharp tactics, and a verdict that changed a life. Let's dive in. Today's guest is attorney Justin Capek. Justin is a fearless and aggressive trial lawyer. His practice is focused on representing citizens accused of a variety of crimes in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, while specializing in firearms and narcotics trafficking offenses. Today, we're going to talk about a case where Justin's client was charged with a homicide and was facing life without parole. The case involved a shooting incident captured on video where Justin's client fired a single shot during a confrontation, but was ultimately found not guilty by the jury due to reasonable doubt created by tainted police identification and questionable investigative procedures. But before we unpack the courtroom drama, let's get to know the person behind the fight. So Justin, tell us what inspired you to be a criminal defense attorney.
I'm 33 years old. Ultimately, when I was 18, I enlisted in the Army. I went to military high school growing up. And while I was in the military, I was trying to find my way and see kind of what career path fit me. I ended up going to college. Afterwards, I got a bachelor's degree in philosophy and political science. Ultimately, after that, I really wasn't sure what I was going to do with those degrees. And I decided, you know what, why don't I give law school a shot? I had my college paid for by the Army, so I thought, you know what, if I can spare myself a little bit of a financial burden just because I got it paid for from college, I'll go into law school. So I went into law school, I completed it. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. You're going to hate me for this, but originally what I wanted to do was be a prosecutor.
You saw the light. I'm not going to hate you. You saw the light.
I had applied to every county around Philadelphia, Montgomery County, Bucks County, and no one hired me. And it wasn't like I had a bad resume. So I ultimately ended up doing workers' compensation law for about 6 months, which I hated, before my boss at the time had suggested I reach out to one of his personal friends who is now my business partner. I started doing criminal defense with him, and it ended up being a humongous opportunity for me, and it was hugely serendipitous because it really fits my personality more. It allowed me to become a really good and creative trial lawyer, especially in the effectiveness nature of our business. And I think when you look at it as a whole, not many lawyers get to go to trial every day and be creative. When you have transactional lawyers, even personal injury, which you and I both know you don't always go to court for. We do those. We do a lot of arbitrations and stuff, but I really was held to do something that required me to do trial. And that's how I fell into the criminal defense aspect of it. And it's made me a much better lawyer, as you probably are in all your civil cases too. So that's how I ended up in criminal defense.
I tell people that all the time. The criminal lawyer has way more courtroom experience than the typical personal injury lawyer. And when you do both, it kind of gives you an edge. Look, you're one of many people I know and friends I have that were in the military, mostly Army and Marines, and they came out and they do criminal defense work. I think being a fighter or being willing to stand up for others, it transitions well from the military to doing criminal defense work.
100%. And the organizational skills too, and being able to stay on task and stay on point. I mean, you know that through law school and just in our practice, it requires so much mental fortitude and organization. Lawyers that stay organized are more successful than lawyers that obviously don't stay organized.
I can't even get started until I organize the file. I have to do that. So where did you grow up and how did that shape your views of justice?
So I grew up in Philadelphia. I spent some time after my parents got divorced, kind of splitting between South Jersey, right outside of Philadelphia. But mostly I've grown up in Philadelphia my entire life. For college, I didn't go too far. I went to Penn State, which was, not too far out from Philadelphia, but it's in sort of a smaller town vibe. And then I came back here for law school. But growing up in this city in particular, it's made me more empathetic and sympathetic to kind of the plights of people. I mean, I see it every day, especially the drug addiction. I see the difficulties with youth. That is kind of a nationwide thing that we're seeing now. But it's definitely made me more self-aware and appreciative of the plight of people and the reasons and their motivations for doing certain things or abstaining from certain things. I like to call it the warm apple pie and white picket fence mentality that these prosecutors have, where they think that everything kind of revolves around this nice neighborhood and nothing could ever be bad, and anything that's remotely bad, like jaywalking, is deserving of some just retributive punishment. So it's made me a lot more in tune with my environment and the people I represent.
Something you said prompted me to ask this. We have the same problems when you're talking about juveniles. We have an explosion of juvenile shootings and murders.
It's been exponential compared to 3 years ago. I have done more juvenile homicides, juvenile shootings, gun possessions. And the big thing now that these kids have is they're getting these switch modifications for Glock handguns. And it's insane. They're readily available, but I have represented more 14, 15, and 16-year-old kids that have either been shot, have shot somebody, or been shot at, and carry a gun. And I mean, that's a whole nother topic we can get into about what's the genesis of that, how do we prevent that. And I have a lot of strong feelings about that.
Same here. One day I want to sit down and have a conversation with a group of people just about that.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into that. I think there's, really where it starts, and, not to tangential out of it, but, it starts at home, and it starts with a strong man in the household, and it starts with people being mentored. And these kids nowadays, they have no positive male role models. They have no mentorship. They have no after-school programs. They have no ways of really incurring or instilling any set of discipline like we had in the Army or even in general. And it is absolutely wreaking its havoc on society.
I agree. I tell people there's no accountability. And I might get pushed back for this statement, but I stand by it. And there's research to back it up. But I was raised by a single mother. And I tell people all the time, a woman cannot raise a boy to be a man.
You will get pushed back, but I agree with that statement. It's 100% accurate.
And look, I'm a lawyer, but my brother, who's 2 years younger than me, is serving a 40-year prison sentence in Texas. He's been in jail longer than I've been a lawyer, and he's younger than me. There's a study out there that says that the lowest rate of incarceration is children raised in two-parent household. The highest rate of incarceration is children raised by mothers only. And children raised by fathers only, the incarceration rate is the same as if they're raised by two-parent households.
I've cited that evidence, and it's a common theme in every one of my sentencing memos. Single mother or father was a piece of shit, wasn't around, didn't participate, didn't care. And it's a trend, and there's absolutely empirical studies that show that this is not just a claim. This isn't misogyny. It's not gender insensitive. It's not insensitive to single mothers who do their best because they have to.
And some do great, but the average is not happening.
Yeah. Again, you should do a podcast on that, like do a panel, because that would be a great one to discuss.
I agree. I think I'm going to do that. And I'm going to drag you on it too.
100%. I'll be on that too. I've seen it day in and day out. So that'd be a really good panel to do.
So, what would you say a typical day is like in your practice?
So a typical day for me starts pretty early. I pride myself on being available pretty much 24/7. I don't have kids and I'm not married, so I have a lot of free time, for lack of a better way to put it. But, I typically get up anywhere between 5 and 5:30. I start my morning. In the winter, I'll do the cold plunge, and then ice bath. Usually in the summer, I'll do a cold shower to get myself started, do some meditation, journaling, go through my phone, get myself together. But after I do all that stuff and get myself primed for the day, what I typically do is text all my clients that have court dates that day, remind them where to be. And then I'm usually in court every day, give or take, from at least 8 o'clock until 11:30. If I have a trial, sometimes a little bit later. But I'm in court every single day. So my court day is pretty much 8 a.m. to noon. And then I work through lunch. I get back, I do my return work, and then I just focus on other projects or any sort of, if I have to do follow-up calls, if I have to reach out to clients, if I have to do, any sort of marketing or cold calls or anything like that. But, especially I would say in the past 3 years, since my practice has gotten much more expanded, now that I'm a partner at the law firm, I have a lot more responsibilities. I have to oversee 2 other lawyers. I have to ensure that their projects are completed, that they're achieving their self-development goals, that they're on point with everything. So my day in the afternoon is very, very task intensive. And then usually around 5 or 6 o'clock is when I try to take it down and go to the gym for at least an hour and a half. And then when I get home is usually my time to decompress from work for at least an hour and a half, have dinner, and then go to bed. But the one thing I will say though, like a typical day for me is I am on this thing like constantly, either texting, answering messages on Instagram, answering emails, but it's a constant thing. And that's one of the reasons for my success. And I try to tell other young lawyers is you have to answer the phone and you have to answer it when people call. And it doesn't matter if it's late, if it's early, you got to pick up the phone. So one of the biggest things I would say during my day, the most difficult challenge is just making sure that I keep up with all my text messages and phone calls that I have to hit back.
I can tell the audience that know this, but I feel compelled to tell them, like, I know you're busy because we're recording this on a Saturday afternoon right now.
This is my jail day. So typically today is when I go to the jails. So I went yesterday all afternoon to go see 10 people yesterday. I think I have about 35 people total, but I had saw the 10 people I need to see yesterday so I can do everything on a Saturday. But, usually, the jail component is once a week, sometimes twice a week if I have to do trial prep, but you know what that's like. It's a trip up there. You spend a lot of time up there with those guys.
What's one thing people often misunderstand about what you do?
I think the most common misconception that I get, and I think in the sense of I understand it, but I think it's completely wrong, is I've represented some people that have done some not so nice things and some stuff that's been in the media. The media spins a story on it one way or the other. And they think that I'm either co-opting or co-signing that behavior, and that the only reason I'm a defense lawyer is because I'm co-signing that bad behavior, I'm co-opting it, and I want crime to occur, and I'm just some greedy, crime addict.
But they say crime feeds my family. That's true, but I'm not in favor of crime.
That's the thing too. They think that because I represent somebody, because my job is to ensure that they get justice, that due process is done, that they are protected in a system that is very one-sided, and to ensure that a fair trial happens, that I'm somehow, not in favor of, crime reduction, which is just couldn't be farther from the truth whatsoever. I think that's the biggest misconception that we get, is that we're just people that love crime and we have no sympathy for victims. We have no sympathy for the crime statistics, and it's just not that.
No, look, I tell people all the time, if we could do away with, especially the violent crimes and the drugs that are killing people, I wouldn't mind going find something else to do. If we're going to minimize that, and look, I don't have as many clients accused of murder or selling fentanyl that's killing people. I'm okay not having that if it's going to improve society.
And you think about it, in a perfect world, in a justice system that is perfect, everyone would be guilty of the crime. They would do the right investigation, and there wouldn't be any real need for a defense lawyer outside of plea bargaining. But we don't live in a world like that, and the adversarial system works. And it works because it's not a fair system at the end of the day, and the only people that keep it fair are good lawyers.
That's right. I agree with that 100%. I know you kind of touched on this earlier, but I got to ask, what do you believe sets you apart in this field of criminal defense work? I know your military background jumps out at me, but if there's anything else that you would say sets you apart from all the other lawyers out there or firms out there, what would you say?
I would say it's my sense of task and purpose. I am absolutely relentless in the sense of how I represent each and every client. I make it my mission. I take it very seriously. And the one thing that I do that is the like kiss of death and everyone complains about is I don't hear from my lawyer. I don't hear from my lawyer. I always call people back. I always send a text back. I always make it a point to be available to my clients if they need to be available. It may not always be convenient. I may be in the middle of something. I may be having dinner with my girlfriend. I may be at a barbecue. I may be in church, but I'll get back to you. I always do before the end of the day. And that is the one thing that, I think sets me apart too, is my commitment to, my cases, my clients, and making sure that they know what's going on and they're informed, especially when you're operating, and their families too, especially when you're dealing with somebody's most unpleasant moment of their entire life and their most unpleasant experience. Because there's nothing worse than being prosecuted, really. I mean, maybe dealing with like a really horrible illness, but being forcibly incarcerated, and pending a trial is a horrible experience. And, when you don't hear from your lawyer and you're left in this abyss of uncertainty, it's a horrible thing to do. And just by answering the phone and being communicative, I'm setting myself apart from 80% of people who just choose not to do it because they see it as an inconvenience rather than an advantage.
All of my clients have my cell phone number. And there's lawyers that say I would never give them my cell phone number. There's been a few people that's like, hey, it's 11:30 at night. This is not really an emergency. Can we talk in the morning? But for the most part, when somebody needs a lawyer, especially in criminal defense, like typically they have an emergency and we need to be available.
And what I say about it this way too is like, this as well, like you're the only other person I've met outside of like, locally here that does criminal defense and personal injury. If you're the guy that answers the phone, they get into a rear end car accident. Who they're going to call? They're going to call you from the hospital. They're going to send you the insurance information, and you're going to be the one to get the figure. And, just by virtue of you answering the phone and being available, you've now set yourself up for a financial win on a car accident case. And everything plays together, and especially answering the phone and being available to your clients. And I think that's what really separates, good lawyers from great lawyers and great lawyers from excellent lawyers is how much you're willing to put into your clients and be responsive, because that is the number one complaint if you research it.
Nationwide, I'm sure that's the number one complaint. I can't talk to my lawyer. So the case we're going to talk about today, can you give us a 30,000-foot overview of this case?
First week of May back in 2021. So it's crazy. Today is May 3rd, and it was actually exactly 4 years ago today. It's crazy we timed it this way. So 4 years ago, there was a homicide that had happened in North Philadelphia. The decedent had pulled up in a car with a friend who was in the vehicle in the front passenger seat. Across the street, essentially parallel to where they parked, is a deli that had several surveillance cameras that went in a multitude of different directions, almost to a 180-degree field of view. So there was a front-on camera, a camera that went 90 degrees to the left, and a camera that went 90 degrees to the right. And that showed essentially the whole street for about a half a block. And this vehicle pulls up right in the middle of that block, so it's right in the field of view. So this vehicle pulls up, and no one gets out of the car. Ultimately, what it appears to be, and I learned from my client, was they were going to like a balloon release for someone who had been killed like either the week before or otherwise. So that vehicle with the decedent, who is the driver of that vehicle, remains on scene for about 15 to 20 minutes. Another vehicle pulls up and begins congregating with that vehicle, and those guys get out. And they're all, the decedent, his front seat passenger, and these unknown males are congregating. It's about 6 guys. So about 15 minutes later, you see another SUV with no plate pull up. 4 individuals get out of that car, one of whom is my client, and the other 2 are his co-defendants. The 4th gentleman was never identified because he had a shiesty mask on all the way up, so he was unable to be seen. So my client had a dark jacket and he had on a wave cap, but it was interesting because it wasn't like a black wave cap. It was almost like the same skin color as his tone. So it made him look a little bit like, if you looked at it from afar, it looked like he was bald, but then you could see it was tied up to his hair. But I'll get to why that's important later. So they get out and they begin walking over to the group of people. So my client has his hands in his pockets like this, and then the guy with the shiesty has his hands in his pockets, like in his jacket pocket. And this other individual who is known to law enforcement was investigated and ultimately never charged. And that's another whole thing we'll get into about, later on in this. He has beef with the driver. Unknown reasons why, but from what I understood, he had some prior beef with this guy. He pulls the door open of the car. They've now sat back in the car. He pulls out a handgun. He starts pistol whipping the driver. So at that point, everyone's kind of looking. They're just kind of watching it. They're not getting involved because dude's got a gun. They're not looking to really do anything, with it. So as he's pistol whipping, the decedent, who's now seated in the passenger seat of the car, he gets out of the car and he pulls a gun out. So as he's pulling a gun out, my client draws his weapon and fires a shot, but it misses. The guy who's pistol whipping, literally like within maybe a second after my client fires a shot, like reaches his hand over the roof of the car and kills it with one shot. Just shoots him like directly right in the face, instantly kills him. It was extremely, extremely graphic and horrible. So at that point, my client leaves on foot in another direction. The actual shooter who commits the full-on homicide, him and the other two guys get in the car and they drive away. Ultimately, at that point, it's investigated. The photos are disseminated from the video, and ultimately, everyone's identified. Ultimately, the only people that are charged for this homicide under a conspiratorial theory are my client, the other passenger of the car. The gentleman who is the trigger puller, who actually fires the fatal shot, is never charged, and he's known to law enforcement. And that did not come out at trial, but I was flabbergasted, frankly, after I remember, because I was going to bring it up on cross-examination with the assigned detective. But she never testified, which, as you know, is extremely unusual, if not unheard of, that the assigned detective would not testify in a homicide case. So, but that kind of gets into it. That's, a little bit later. But after that, he gets arrested. He's charged with homicide. He gets remanded to jail. He's held on no bail. We go to a preliminary hearing. He's obviously held for court. And I told him, I said, look, man, I think you can fire a shot. If they believe it's you, it's maybe an attempted murder, but you may have some affirmative defense there because dude's pulling out a gun, maybe some defensive, kind of quasi-defensive others. So I thought it was reasonable to go. Now, mind you, kid has no record. He's 19 at the time. He has no prior record whatsoever. We got all the discovery. We prepped everything up. And, they had originally offered me 15 to 30 years, which, we were never going to take. And I had prepped a different pretrial motions that we kind of got into, but that's really the background of what the case looked like in terms of just top down from what the evidence was.
I'm ready to get into it because this is interesting as hell for a lot of reasons. But why do you think it's important for the public to know about this case?
Because, and I feel bad saying this, but being a police officer and being a detective is an incredibly difficult and it's an incredibly dangerous job. And I want to preface that. It's a job that I would never do because it's thankless, it's dangerous, and it's extremely difficult. And they go out there and put their lives on the line for people that don't care every single day of the week. And they don't get enough credit for what they do. Having said that, police officers and detectives don't always tell the truth. And that's what this case is about, because it's important and it's paramount to a fair justice system and the public's faith in a justice system that as a component of that duty to protect and serve, that you are honest and you don't do things that are shady and contravene the system of due process. And that's what this case is about. This case is about cheating, really, and doing things that are underhanded and shady in an effort to get a conviction on somebody. And because I was able to pick them out, that's where we really exposed it. I'm telling you, if it was not for that misconduct, they would have got a conviction. And because the assigned detective didn't play by the rules, they lost that case. And rightfully so. They deserve to lose for a variety of different reasons because it wasn't fair and it wasn't right.
When your client first came in to see you, how would you describe his emotional state? Or when you first saw him? I know he was in jail.
He was one of the most calm and easygoing people I've ever represented. I don't want to give him credit, but like he's a product of the streets. Although he was never in jail, like he was an intimidating dude. Like he carried himself very, very strong for a 19-year-old kid. He understood the process. He never complained and he trusted me. And he told me, he's like, listen, you got this. I believe in you. And he also came from a very, very solid family. If you can imagine, his mother was like a captain at a correctional facility. She was one of the supervisors at a correctional facility. His father had like a trucking business. Like they were good people, but for whatever reason, he was kind of the pariah of the family. You know, his brother was a fashion designer. He had lived on his own since he was like 16, and he was very in tune with what was going on. And, you know, I felt bad for him in a lot of ways because he looked like he grew up quick, but he was cool. He was not stressed out at all, which was unusual.
Now, when you started to take a look at the case, what were some of his initial doubts or fears, and what were some of your concerns?
My initial concern was if you really looked at it and looked at him, you would put the two together. And my concern was I can't ask questions of a video. So I was very concerned that he was going to be found guilty of at least attempted murder or at a bare minimum conspiracy, which still would have gotten him life in prison. So that was my big concern, was more the video than anything else. And then he's identified in that video by his previous, like he didn't have a record, but he got involved in some juvenile thing where he like stole a cell phone from a Planet Fitness locker and he got like a consent decree. So he was on like some real light supervision for juvenile stuff for 2 years while he was 17. And his probation officer identified him from the video. But that's where the dominoes really started to fall down with the police misconduct, was when I started looking into that identification.
So that brings me to my next point that I want to talk about. What was some of the evidence, at least initially, because I know the prosecution doesn't typically give us all the evidence. We kind of have to keep going back and forth to get what's omitted. So what did they initially present to you, and where did that take you as far as developing the case?
So they gave me everything. There were no cell phone records in the case, which is kind of unusual. There was no firearm recovered, no ballistics, really that came back to anything. But when you have a video case, like I think a lot of times they don't need that because the jury's allowed to make reasonable inferences about like what objects are and what conduct is. So it wasn't a case where it was a whodunit, kind of case and they were trying to prove it. But one of the things that I looked at was when I looked at the ID, because I wanted to see kind of how that worked out. And I went through their emails. They presented me with the email setting up the meeting for the probation officer to come in and make an ID off the video from the detective's government email. And I went through it and I looked, and I remember seeing this email that said, "Good afternoon. When are you able to come in and view the video of my client's name?" First thought in my head was, why would this detective name him in the email? Because it said based on my previous conversation. So I was like, they fucking have a phone call where she was like, "I need you to identify this person who's on your probation in a video," because that's the only way you can read that email. That's a confirmation of a tainted ID, which again, for people who don't know, is an identification is supposed to be free of suggestion, free of taint. So what should have happened was, "Mr. Probation Officer, I need you to take a video and see if you can identify anybody in this video. Not, I need you to identify this specific person," because of course he's going to identify that specific person because you already told him who's in the video. So I saw that and I'm like chomping at the bit, and I was like, let's get it suppressed. And we filed it, and then we were going to the motions and we were getting ready to litigate it. And my partner was like, he just goes, he's like, "Let that in. They're going to hate that. They will hate that that's the way the ID came in." And I thought to myself, I said, man, that's kind of a gamble. But, after, I started digging more into the file and what literally zero investigatory steps they took after that, I figured, you know what? It's better if that comes in because then they get a flavor for how bad this investigation was and how absolutely rife with bullshit it was. And they get a real feel for it.
I gotta say, I interviewed somebody yesterday, And it was a husband accused of domestic violence of his wife. And there was a restraining order that the lawyer initially didn't want in, but when it came in, he was able to actually use that to show she wanted a divorce. And she used the restraining order and the criminal proceeding together to try to get the divorce. Initially, they didn't want the restraining order in because the judge had already determined that there was sufficient grounds. But the restraining order coming in at trial actually helped because it showed the motive of the alleged victim.
I had the same one 2 weeks ago. I won a jury trial for like a sex case that was completely, again, fabricated. But we filed a motion to keep out, my client being in jail and not mentioning he was in jail or he ever was in jail. I opened the door with his visit records to show that the complaining witness, despite having this horrible thing happen to her, visited him 65 times in jail afterwards. And then testified at his trial where he was locked up for a gun to say that her car operated, so she won the motion. And I opened the door and I did it deliberately because why not? It was worth doing it. But either way, with this case, I started digging through the file more and I realized that it was very hurriedly put together. They got the video, they interviewed whoever was on scene, they got the 911 calls, they got this identification of my client, and then they interviewed the co-defendant, and then nothing happened. The file just went dead. No search warrants performed, no social media grabs, no phone grabs, and they identified the shooter. They identified him by name. The guy that actually shot, he was on probation. He had a probation officer. He was known to law enforcement. He was clear as day that it was him on the video. But it just ended. And I remember thinking to myself, I was like, why is he not charged? Why is there not an arrest warrant for him? And I remember digging through the file and digging through the file and digging through the file, and there's no arrest warrant for him. And when the DA that finally tried the case, who was a really fantastic guy, inherited a really bad case, and he was in the Marines. He was a really good guy, absolute gentleman about it. He was under marching orders and did what he had to do. But I emailed him and I said, where's the arrest warrant for the shooter? And he's like, there is none. And I said, that can't be accurate. And I was almost dumbfounded. I said, are you serious? He's like, I can't answer that. I ended up finding out later that the detective on that case, the reason that the file went dead, essentially, meaning there was no real follow-up investigation, was she was forcibly reassigned. I never found out, and I really don't care why she was reassigned, but because it only mattered what the jury was able to think in their mind. So we ended up getting a stipulation as to why she didn't testify, and it was only because she was reassigned, which I knew was going to be the kiss of death in my closing argument.
We got all of this. We got the lead detective. I made notes. Some of the key factors were the tainted photo array, the detective's absence, the video evidence. I know there's the jury perception, but I don't want to go into that until we kind of go through the parts of the trial.
So we go into the trial, and I keep it very open-ended. Usually my openings, I never promise too much.
Let me ask you this before you get to opening. Do y'all get jury selection?
Yeah.
All right, so tell me about how you incorporated your theory or your theme into the jury selection process.
One of the things that I wanted people who were familiar with video. So I was hoping that I would get maybe someone who was a videographer or a photographer or had some experience in electronics. Do you know what I mean? I wanted young people, and I wanted people who worked in education. I find them to be typically a little bit more adverse to the government. They're a little bit more sympathetic to defendants. I didn't want anybody who was prior law enforcement initially. And then I thought about it and I was like, man, you know what? I'll let them slide a couple people in if they want. If I get one or two people that have friends that work in law enforcement, I'm cool with that. It's going to come out. There's cheating here. But we had a pretty solid jury. I had a guy who was a wedding photographer who I picked. And I had a guy who was a victim of gun violence. I had two young female college students. And then I had an older gentleman and then from what I remember, the foreman was an older lady that was a graduate professor from what I remember. So it was a good jury. I was happy. Here's a crazy nugget of jury selection that happened real quick. That was our second jury. The first jury pool, we're in the midst of doing voir dire. My client is in a suit. He turns around and he introduced himself because you have to make sure you don't know the person, right? And I kid you not, Chris, this was like the craziest things I've ever seen happen in my career. He gets up, this like middle-aged white dude just stands up in the pool and just goes, wow, another black kid with tattoos. He must be guilty. Totally tainted the whole jury.
Oh,
Totally
wow.
like, and I remember turning around. I think I audibly said, are you fucking kidding me? Like out loud to like this guy and to the panel. Our judge used to be like a prosecutor and she's younger. She lost her mind. Like excused the whole panel, immediately found him in contempt, put him in the basement, made him sit in jail for the entire trial until we were done. Made him sit for a whole week. And at the end, after we were done, after we got the not guilty verdict, she brought him up for contempt and she let him out. But she was like red in the face furious. It was so outrageous to like say something like that, you know, just in general. And he blamed it on like he has like a mental disorder. He was full of shit. He just wanted attention. That was crazy. So I think of that as maybe like divine intervention. Like maybe I wouldn't have gotten a good pool, but you know. So that's how we ended up picking. We got a good panel, and you know, then we rolled right into opening arguments same day.
Did you put any law enforcement on your jury?
No.
No. Take me through opening. I'm assuming the state goes first and then you go?
In PA, we're allowed to reserve it for our case in chief. Everyone always just goes right after it because why not? I mean, what are you going to do? So my openings typically, I like to underpromise and overdeliver because there's certain things that you never want to lock into something and then get stuck with it later. So typically my openings, I try to keep them very short. I basically said, you're going to see a video. It's not him on the video. You're never going to believe it's him on the video. And just keep an open mind because you're going to hear a lot of things. You're going to need to pay attention. And you're going to have to evaluate credibility every step of the way over the next couple of days. And I just asked him to keep an open mind, be fair, be impartial. You know, he's shrouded in the presumption of innocence, and that is a shroud that covers him up and until the time you folks decide that he is no longer shrouded in that presumption of innocence. And I kept it open. And the DA just went through like what conspiracy was and how it's a conspiracy, and it's really it, you know. And I left him with an open mind.
Do you remember how many witnesses they called?
2. If you can imagine that, 2.
2 witnesses in a conspiracy to commit murder case. So let's talk about the first witness they called. What did the prosecutor do on direct exam, and how did you deal with it on cross-examination?
He called the juvenile probation officer. Actually, no, I lied. It took 3. There was the crime scene guy, but he was really of no moment. He didn't add anything of value. I'll go through that in reason in a minute. So the first person was the probation officer who identified my client in the video. Basically said, yeah, that's him. I supervised him, and you know, that's him on the video. So my cross-examination was basically what I told you. I said, you got a phone call from Detective so-and-so. Yes, yes. And in that phone call, she asked you, quite candidly, can you identify this young man in a video? Yes, she did. She did it by name. Yes. And this is prior to you even seeing a video. Yes. So prior to seeing this video and making an appointment where she came down to your office and with a laptop and showed you the video, you knew who you were looking for. Is that fair? Yes. I'm going to show you to Marcus D1. Is this your email confirming it? And publish it to the jury. And like, they're not thinking about like why that's constitutionally tainted, but they're like wondering, like, I could see they were thinking that was kind of weird because they've seen First 48, they've seen forensic files, and they know what like double blind photo arrays and all that shit is. So comes in horrible. We take a break after that witness, and even the judge looked at the prosecutor like this. She's like, sure you don't want to make a plea deal? And he's like, I got to try it. Like, you know, he was a gentleman. He was a true gentleman about it, you know? And after that witness, it went to 4 to 8 on conspiracy to commit third-degree murder. It went from 15 to 30 to 4 to 8.
That's something.
And he had 2 years in at that point. And I went in the booth, and I saw him, and I said, yo, bro, it's 4 to 8 right now. To his credit, he was like, fuck that. We got this. We're going to win. He's like, I believe. Like, I prayed on it. He's like, I'm not taking shit. I'm not taking a conviction. It was so funny. And I'm thinking, I'm like, bro, like, come on.
Yeah, it's one of those deals where, as your lawyer, I get it, but this is really a good deal.
They hate that. And I said, bro, it's you on the video. Like, what do you want me to do? So that was a short witness. The next witness they called was crime scene. As you know, crime scene is pretty much the person that paints the picture of what happened on the scene, what did they recover, what efforts did they do, what did they observe, how many shell cases did they pick up, did they transport the victim, where did they initially notice gunshot wounds, and what was recovered. It's kind of like the who's who of the scene. Really, there wasn't anything in dispute. It was just, where the shell cases were recovered, the body, what position he was in. There was a weapon obviously next to him that came out. And we stipulated to the postmortem because there was really nothing there. And we got a lot of stipulations in. Just didn't really weren't to the ultimate issue of the case, which was an identity issue. So after that, they called the detective who put together the video compilation. He was their last witness. So he just basically walked through and, we kept him pretty honest. He was not allowed to make an ID of anybody on the video. He was just allowed to show, what it showed. And he's actually from another country. I think he's British. So he has this very nice, soothing and, voice of when he talks about stuff. And he gets away a lot of times. People let him, don't object to let him get away with narrating stuff. So I wasn't going to let him get away with that. And ultimately, the prosecutor, to his immense credit, told him, don't start doing that in front of this jury because I don't want to get objected to. So he played the video, and my cross-examination really focused on, you recovered the video, you put together this compilation, but sir, you're not the assigned, right? No, I'm not. You were directed by the assigned simply to recover this video and put together a compilation, and that's it, right? Yep. Did you serve any search warrants? Nope. Did you do any forensic interviews? Nope. Did you do any canvassing of the scene? Nope. And that's all done by the assigned, correct? Correct. There came a point in time where she was no longer a part of this investigation, correct? And I was not allowed to bring out why, which I thought was fucked up, but
sometimes it's good. What was the reason why she was no longer allowed?
They didn't tell me the reason. It wasn't for anything that you would think, where she got caught lying. My understanding was there was some fraternization going on that was impermissible.
Sometimes the jury might forgive that. Sometimes I think it's good when the jury doesn't know.
I didn't like that. I think in matters of love, people are a little bit more tolerant of that, and they would think oh, well, she had a boyfriend. It's a boys club and they were picking on her. But so I just said she was no longer a part of this investigation. And his answer was no, she was reassigned. And I just left it. I was perfect answer. Leave it at that.
I mean, there's 12 people on the jury, and all 12 of them probably have different ideas about why this lady is no longer assigned to this case.
And then I just basically went through you were privy to the case file. No search warrants were done. No arrest warrants were signed for this person. No. Roger that. And then I sat down. And that was their last witness. They called the crime scene, the probation officer, and the video recovery.
Did you call any witnesses?
Nope. Got a stipulation for his peacefulness. Couldn't get a stipulation to character, but I did get stipulation to peacefulness, which was kind of silly because it really didn't matter because it was an ID case one way or the other. Originally, in the beginning, I talked about him wearing a wave cap that was somewhat of the same skin color and skin tone as he had. And that became important because it altered the way that his facial features came up. And it altered the way that he looked on the video from when he sat with me next to me, because he had a neck tattoo at the time. So he has, Jigsaw from Saw?
Mm-hmm.
He has hear no evil, speak no evil, see no evil, but of Jigsaw. So Jigsaw on his throat is speak no evil, and then on the right or left side, it's see no evil and hear no evil. At the time of the shooting, he only had speak no evil in his throat. So on the video, you can see it, but it looks like a blob. It almost looks like a blob, not a portrait. And when he sat down, you could see that he had it all around his neck. And they completely shit the bed in not discussing the discrepancy or the timeline between his arrest photo, which they were allowed to look at, and the still photo of the guy in the video. Because the still photo of the guy in the video, he's got nothing on his neck, nothing on the sides of his neck. So I hammered that home. It's not the same tattoo. And the way that the wave cap, it made his face look really almost fat, and it made his nose look wider. And it made him look lighter skinned, and he was darker skinned. So I just argued that, in closing, the way I kind of went through it from what I remember is the first thing I did was I talked about the ID being just horrible. So really, and I knew that the government was going to argue, irrespective, the probation officer's opinion doesn't matter. It's your opinion that matters. So even if you discount his opinion, yours is the only one that matters. So that I went through basically why you couldn't believe beyond a reasonable doubt that it was him, the neck tattoo, the facial features. And I essentially said, what the government has given you is a young adult black male with a neck tattoo. And that narrows down the population to how many, folks? Like, how many people in Philadelphia are young, black, 18 to 24-year-old men with a neck tattoo? Thousands, tens of thousands maybe. So that was part one. And then what I really kind of crescendoed was towards this police misconduct in the end. I remember the analogy I used was, I think one of the last words I said was you have to probe the depths of your mind as to what reassign means. You're going to have to go into your imagination to come up with an explanation as to why this detective was reassigned and no further action was taken on this file.
That's beautiful.
And I said, that's a doubt that would cause you to pause. That's a doubt that would cause you to hesitate, because you have to wonder. And you're not here to wonder. You're here to decide the matter of the utmost importance in his life. And then I basically said at the end, my last kill shot was, the government has presented you with a sick carnival game of a case. You guys know, some of us who've grown up in Philly, we go down the shore, go to the boardwalk, you throw a ball into a basket, you get a big teddy bear. You carry that teddy bear and you show it off, and you show all your friends how happy you are with that teddy bear. But instead of a teddy bear, they're asking you to take away the rest of that man's tomorrows. He doesn't get to walk down a boardwalk. He doesn't get to show off his new toy. And that's what they're asking you to do. They're asking you to throw a ball into a basket and send him to jail for the rest of his life. Not here, not ever, not guilty. So that's how we closed. And then I got real nervous with Deliberations because they wanted to see the video. So the first question was, can we see the video again? And we left them alone with the video. And we let the photography guy basically on the laptop play it on the screen as many times as they wanted. And they watched it for hours. It had to be 3 hours. They played it back over and over and over and over again. And I started to get nervous because I was like, shit, they're going to think it's the same guy because they had the picture up, the picture of him up. I was getting really nervous. We closed, I think, in the morning. They went to lunch. I think after 6 hours, it was 4:30. We were getting ready to break, and then they had a verdict. And right before they had a verdict, they asked, can we get the definition of reasonable doubt? And at that point, I was like,
yes, we got him.
She re-instructed them on reasonable doubt. They came back not even 10 minutes later. They had a verdict. And it's always surreal when you kind of feel it. You're about to win. And you put on that effort and that time and you really dug through it. So real fun part of the story and the way they got done was, they read the verdict. They said not guilty, I think 6 times. It was murder 1, murder 2, murder 3, attempted murder, aggravated assault, conspiracy, gun. And it was just not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. His mom fainted.
His mom fainted?
Fainted in the back of the court. And the decedent's mother, quietly got up and she left. And, I watched her leave. To some degree, I did feel bad, but I did remember that the co-defendant lost, went to trial and he lost.
Somebody did go to prison for this.
For 20 years, yeah, someone did. That's what was the worst part, was the guy that really was the trigger puller didn't go to jail.
Well, he didn't even get arrested or charged, right?
No, he got his probation terminated a week before we started trial, if you can imagine that. And no one picked up the file. No one's arrested him. And I really wanted to tell that mother and be like, I wish I could tell you what I know because you deserve that justice for your son, but I had to leave it be. So that was a good victory.
How did your client respond to the verdict being read?
He was cool. After the victim's mom left, I shook his hand. I said, congratulations. And he said, thank you. And he got out that night. And then it was the Thursday. The Friday, he came to see me in the office. We had pizza. I basically said, look, bro, let's get a plan together, get your life back. You're 21 years old now. You got a second chance at life. Let's figure it out. If you want me to help you with some job applications, if you want me to help you with your GED or any sort of program, let's get it together. Let's keep you out of the streets. And I guess the irony of it was a month later, he got booked with a gun. So I'm now representing him on a gun case that is winnable, frankly. Yeah, but he was back in jail for 2 months, and now he's on pretrial house arrest.
Hopefully he gets it together.
He needs to. And, I think the real thing that, when people need to understand is like, you take this job a little bit personally sometimes, especially when you represent somebody for 2 years and you get to know them and, their story. And I really wanted him to, get it right, because I didn't want him to fall back into that kind of crowd. I didn't want him to fall back into the repeated cycle of violence and hanging around people that are just going to bring him down, and, the person, places, and things that led him to where he was. And I do believe in second chances, and I do believe in some level of divine intervention. I hope that he gets it right, and it was a tremendous, tremendous, tremendous win to get a win for someone that really shouldn't have won, but won because of a government employee doing things that they weren't supposed to do.
Do you think they overcharged them? Because we see that quite often, probably throughout the country, where prosecutors charge the highest potential crime they can find in the book, even though a lower grade offense is more appropriate.
I think so. Even if you look at it from the video, they didn't go there with the intention of beating that guy up. It was very clear that they were there for the balloon release, and the driver, the actual shooter, recognized somebody and had his own beef. Because my client didn't jump in. I mean, he's like walking around, but he's just not getting involved in a fight that's not his fight, and no one else is. And it's only when guns start getting pulled out that everyone starts being on high alert for, self-preservation purposes, frankly. But, their theory was that they went there to kill this guy, or to at least at a bare minimum confront him, and that was their second-degree murder theory. There were no text messages between my client or any co-defendants. There was no text message or social media messages between anybody, because she got reassigned and did nothing. The file got driven 30% and then dropped, and then no one did any follow-up. So they were left with an ID, a video, and crime scene.
What would you say this case taught you?
Read every page of discovery. I mean, I always do that, but that is a very important thing that I would tell, if there's other lawyers or criminal defense lawyers that watch this, read every single page, because I had 1,000 pages of discovery and I went through every single one, and that's where I found those emails between her and the probation officer. And that single page email confirming that they had a tainted conversation was one of the keystones of the case.
I tell that to young lawyers all the time, and I tell that to my clients. I say, I'm going to read every single page they give me. And look, sometimes they're going to give me the same document multiple times, and I'm going to read each and every one of those duplicates, because sometimes there'll be one that has 2 extra sentences in it, and it's apparently the same document, the same item number, but they'll have different info in it. I agree 100%. You got to read every piece of paper they put in front of you, and every video they give you, you got to watch it. Because a lot of times the police will write something in a police report, and you watch the video and you're like, that's not what this video shows.
Right. And it happens, and you have to be diligent in reviewing discovery. You have to be diligent in reviewing your case file, because it is someone's freedom. It's not someone's car accident settlement. It's not whether or not they had a previous complaint of like a cervical disc injury or something like that, which is important, in and of itself. But, when you're talking about someone's liberty and whether or not they're going to spend a day or more in jail, it's important to read every single one, and you have to do that. And I think it also taught me too, like, my partner is, in my opinion, the most brilliant, trial lawyer that I've ever seen. And sometimes things that you think are bad are actually good. And I think that's one of the levels that you step up in being a lawyer, is when you kind of graduate from, we need to get all pieces of evidence and everything suppressed and everything excluded and a motion to eliminate out, to really recognizing when certain things are making a tactical nuance on things that should come in.
I like to say that as lawyers, we have to understand human psychology. And although the rules of evidence might allow us to exclude something or limit something, human psychology might dictate, hey, you want to let this in.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And there's certain things that you would normally want out. In that last case I told you, the jury I did 2.5 weeks ago, I let in all kinds of 404B evidence, meaning like evidence of bad character, all the other bad stuff, because it was good. And I let her believe that I wanted that out, and then I opened the door. And again, some people and some prosecutors think that you're being underhanded. I always tell people, if I have impeachment evidence, I don't have to show it to you. Most of the time I will, but I'm under no obligation because you have to prove your case. I have very limited tools to fight your awesome investigatory powers. And being creative, I think, is one of the most important parts of being a good lawyer is being creative and knowing how to talk to people. And that's one of the things that, I credit the military on is my public speaking, but also, learning to put on a show. Like closing and opening is like an audition. It's like an acting audition. Knowing when to have vocal inflections, knowing when to gesticulate in the right way, knowing where to look and where to touch and when to be soft and when to be more forceful. It's an art. And it's an interesting art for a trial lawyer that I think we take a lot of pride in, that we do much better than other lawyers.
I agree. So this story was amazing. You got a victory and your client got out of jail, although he's dealing with a little minor charge right now. But based on what happened in this case, as far as the misidentification, the detective being reassigned, them not calling the lead detective, what should the public take away from this case or this story?
I would say that the takeaway from this is almost in every case, I believe that law enforcement wants to get it right. I would say 95 to 99%, they do want to get it right. But I would say that there is often, once in a while, you will get a case where that statement is contravened and it's not true. I don't think she necessarily didn't want to get it right. I think if I had to really guess, I think that they reassigned her and she said, it's not my problem anymore. That file did not get reassigned to anybody. No one picked it up because there's a gazillion other homicides and shootings in the city. And they were left with it. So I would say that the lesson to the public is, while we always expect our law enforcement to do things correctly, to be diligent, to track down all leads, to do the right thing, and to be fair, it doesn't always happen. And, having a little bit of healthy skepticism is not being mistrusting of the police. It's not saying that all police are bad. It's not a generalization that you can assign to all police officers, but a healthy skepticism never hurt anybody. And there's a Russian proverb that says, trust but verify. And I think that's a good lesson here is it's okay to trust, but it's important to verify. And that's exactly what I did.
I would like to piggyback on that. I tell people I sincerely believe one of the main catalysts in innocent people going to prison is poor investigations. Whether intentional or unintentional, that's how a lot of innocent people end up in prison.
And to piggyback off that, I think that it's not just a poor investigation by law enforcement. It can be a poor investigation by a defense lawyer.
That's right. That's right.
Innocent people go to jail a lot of times because there's either a bad or a tainted investigation by law enforcement, or things that, aren't well, or they make reasonable inferences.
If there's a bad investigation, you need a defense lawyer who's going to tear it apart.
Yep. And investigate people. Pick up where law enforcement left off.
This was beautiful. I can't wait to drop it. But before we go, people need you. Where you are in Philly, people need you. Probably not people here in Louisiana, but who knows? Maybe one day we'll co-counsel on some cases. But where can people find you and connect with you if they need your services?
The best way to get in contact with me is via Instagram. If you search JustinCapek on Instagram, I should come right up. My handle is @_Capac, which is KPAC _ after the C. You can also contact me directly at 877 Capac Law, which is 877 KPAC LAW. It goes right to my cell phone. You can even text that number and it goes right to my cell phone. And you can also find us on the web at defenselawyerphiladelphia.com. That will take you to our law firm's page. Our law firm is Schatz, Steinberg, and Clayman PC. And defenselawyerphiladelphia.com will bring you right to our website. We handle car accident cases, slip and falls, catastrophic injuries, some medical malpractice. But as we heard today, I'm the lead partner who does the criminal defense and traffic defense litigation here.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. The episode releases every other Friday, so you'll get it, before the release.
That sounds good, man. I appreciate it.
All right, same here, man. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate hearing about this case.
Well, Chris, I appreciate your time and the invitation. Obviously, if you're ever in Philadelphia, look us up and go get a cheesesteak or something out here.
Congrats on the Super Bowl. I'm assuming you're an Eagles fan.
Oh yeah, you know what? It's funny. I have like a superstition now because when they won the Super Bowl the first time, I was in Jersey, so I was out of state when they won the Super Bowl. I was at a bar in Jersey, and then this Super Bowl, I was running a marathon in Orlando. That Super Bowl Sunday, I had a marathon in Orlando. So, and then they won. So I feel like as long as I'm not in Philadelphia, they'll potentially win the Super Bowl. But I don't know about this year, man. We'll see.
The one the Saints won, the one Super Bowl they've won in the entire history of the team. I didn't get to watch it because I was preparing for an attempted murder trial. And the damn prosecutor, apparently he watched the Super Bowl because he dismissed the case the morning of trial.
I actually had that on Monday too. I had a shooting case where it was like a clear like self-defense case, and they couldn't get me an offer. Like they couldn't just withdraw it or give him like some sort of like some diversion, non-conviction. And I called him yesterday and I was like, Greg, I was like, bro, like, are we really gonna try this case on Monday? Like really? Like we're really gonna like pick and do all this? And he's like, no, bro. He's like, no. He's like, don't tell your folks, but like it's gonna be a withdrawal. Like, don't worry about it. He's like, just let me do the song and dance a little bit. So I told my client, I was like, hey man, like it sounds like it's going to be like a waiver trial. Like we're going to do a heads up in front of a judge instead of a jury. But he's just going to quietly no process. So it saved me from prepping this weekend because I'm actually moving offices internally in our office. I'm moving to a larger space in the back. So because we have a huge office, we have 55 employees. So I'm moving from a tiny little office that I've been in since I was an intern here to, now this bigger office in the back. So
That's good. All right, man. Well, I appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday.
You too, boss. Anything comes up before then, just hit me up on IG.
Will do.
See you, Chris. Thanks
All
again.
right, take care, man. And that, my friends, is the sound of justice being served. You heard it right here on the Iron Gavel. Thanks for listening. Please remember to like, subscribe, and send this video to anyone who may benefit from it. And I will see you on the next episode.